Now, I will try my best to have this as a how-to tutorial, but ultimately what I want to show you is the tools I used, how I did it, and the mistakes I made, so you can adapt it to your tools and needs. And by the end of the video you will know exactly how to make your own and possibly even learn something new. I'm gonna be honest, I set out to make something completely different than the end product you saw in the intro. So let's start from the beginning and see what happened. The main ingredient here is the veneer edge banding. They come in all kind of shapes and sizes, but the main thing is that it's from real veneer, not some plastic imitation, and it is without pre-applied glue. The roll I used was around 40 meters long, 20 mil wide and 1 mil thick, and by the end of it I used almost all of it. Mileage may vary based on the size of the spiral. The second thing we need is a form to laminate the edge band onto. In my case, a round ventilation pipe, but any pipe would do. Diameter of the pipe will also determine the size of the spiral. The contraption at the bottom was supposed to be part of the form, but in the end it didn't work out, so scratch that and let's pretend it doesn't exist. To figure out how many layers each spiral is going to have, I wrapped it around the tube to measure the length I needed. I would then cut as many strips from the roll as I could and divide them equally into 3. Once all the strips are cut to length and sorted, it's time for glue up. At this stage time is limited, so make sure everything is prepped and ready. I somehow chose the hottest day of the summer and had to move extra fast so the glue wouldn't dry on me. Using a roller to apply glue is probably one of the quickest ways. Only thing I would do different here is not apply glue on the strip that will be facing inwards. It will be just that much less sanding to do later. Start by clamping down from the bottom and then wrapping it around the pipe as tight as you can. Then repeat the process twice more. Once it's all glued and wrapped, you should space it out evenly and make sure there are no obvious gaps. Now comes the fun part, stretching a bunch of rubber bands around it. If your clamps are sticking out or in the way, you can use tape instead and trim down excess parts sticking out. Obviously, the more bands you use, the better. And with that, the tricky part is now over. My plan was to remove the pipe, slap a flower pot on top and voila. But my dreams came crashing down the next day when I realized all I had actually made was a floppy spring. It is strong, in short sections, but over a larger area it becomes too flexible. I had done lamination like this at a smaller scale before, and it was plenty strong. But this time I added too much curve into it, and it lost all the strength I had hoped. Obviously, in hindsight, it makes sense. So that evening I sat down and really racked my brain on what to do with the monster I had just created. So I took the existing spiral and designed some shelves into it. Now that I had a game plan on what to do, I would start the lengthy sanding process. Using a belt sander on the outer face and the edges. Just have to be careful to not get too carried away and sand through the layers. The drill attachment is great for the inside curve and hard to reach places. And finally, 240 grit will be done by hand. I have to mention that all of the sanding should be following the wood grain to avoid any ugly sanding marks that might come up when finishing. In the process, some voids will show up, but CA glue and sandpaper are great for making them disappear. Once the spiral was sanded, I turned my attention to making the shelves. I am using MDF because I have tons of offcuts and I know it's all the same thickness. But the shelves could be made from anything really. Step 1 is to create a perfectly round circle and then copy the 11 other shelves with it. For that, I'm using my circle jig, if I can call it that. What it really is a piece of wood with a nail at the one end and a hole for a guide pushing in the other. Might have to make an actual circle jig at one point. Let me know in the comments if anyone's interested in that. Once there is a nice clean circle routed in, I can cut around it with a jigsaw and then use a flush trim bit to clean up the rest of it. Now that I have a perfectly round circle, I can use it to mark, cut and copy the remaining 11. Each shelf will also get a bevel, except for the part that will intersect with the post. And a little flat spot for better glue adhesion. Now that all of them are round and sanded, it's time to think about the finish. For MDF, the only sane option is paint, and doing it at a stage when everything is still separate. It is such a long topic that it can be a video on its own, and there are already plenty of videos explaining it better than I ever could, so I will be brief. I started by masking the flat spot on the shelf where glue will go. Then brushing on my first coat of primer with a brush and sanding it smooth. After that I would spray another coat of primer and 2 coats of paint. However, if you choose to make your shelves out of wood and plan on clear coating, it's best you do it after glue up. Now, me using a sprayer is a bit of an overkill and more than doable with a foam roller as well. Moving on to the final piece of the puzzle, let's call it the spine, since it will be carrying most of the weight, and it should be made from hardwood. To match the oak edge banding, I am going to make it from a leftover piece of oak. Remember kids, stay in school and keep your blade sharp, otherwise you end up with burn marks like me. Once all 3 pieces are cut to size, I would use the spiral to roughly mark where the middle shelves would be, and then use that distance to mark all 4 shelves, an equal distance apart. Since the spiral is so flexible, there is a lot of wiggle room. Most important thing is that everything is symmetrical. I would then route out the rabbit for the shelves. I used a slightly smaller bit than the thickness of the shelf, so I can fine-tune a tight fit later. A little tip to avoid blowout when routing is to start the climb cut on the exit side, like you see me doing here, and then finish it like normal. Since the spiral is so flexible, none of the positions are set in stone, or wood in this case. All you really need to know is the middle point between the shelves and the angle of the spiral relative to the post. Since the spiral is not completely symmetrical, I will use the middle of it to draw a pencil line and base all of the remaining angles off that one point to keep it symmetrical. Once the lines are marked, it's time to cut the rabbet, just like we did on the shelves. Could be done with a router and a straight edge guide like we did before. But there are always a number of different ways to do the same thing. And this time I will use my track saw to set the depth the same as the thickness of my spiral, and take multiple cuts between the marked lines. Finally, clean it up with a chisel and a bit of sanding. After cutting it to length, the last step on the spine is to make some screw holes for mounting the thing on the wall. I use two sets of drill bits, bigger one that clears only the head of the screw and a smaller one that goes all the way through. Position should be under the shelf, so it is hidden, but far enough that you actually have enough room to fit a drill in there. At this point, all that is left is finish and assembly. I guess it's preference thing which comes first, assembly or finish. I didn't want to take the chance with stain ruining the fresh white paint, so I finished the pieces and then assembled. Remember, we left the rabbet a bit tighter than the shelf, so we can fine tune a nice tight fit with a chisel and then glue the shelves into place. The fit should be tight enough that once pressed into place, it will not fall out. And once the glue sets, it will not go anywhere. After letting the glue sit for overnight, it is now time for the last piece of the puzzle, the spiral. As always, there are many different ways to do this, and you should find what works for you. But here is what I did. I started by finding the middle spot, then sanding away some of the stain, so glue would adhere better, and then shooting a small brad nail to secure it in place. I could then stretch the spiral to find a good position on top and bottom and repeat the process. Now, if you have ever used these small pin nailers, you will know how they have a flat side and how easy they like to bend and shoot out the sides. So always pay attention to gun position, so the flat side of the nail is not aimed in a way it could pop out the side and ruin your entire day. Alternatively, you could also use a small nail and a hammer, or just glue and creative clamping. Last thing I did was trim off the overhanging pieces with a flush cut saw and some paper, as to not scratch the paint. And that's it. You just have to mount it on the wall in any order or orientation you want, preferably upright so things won't slide off the shelf, but who am I to tell you what to do?